From Iran to the Clinton emails controversy to South Carolina State University to whether or not he will be a 2016 vice presidential candidate. And in this special edition of Quintin's Close-Ups, I speak exclusively with Congressman Mark Sanford. Well, Congressman, you know, you are doing fine personally, but a lot of things are not fine overseas. So let's begin this interview with Iran. As you know, Fox News and the AP are both reporting that Iran is making new demands for more uranium concessions for the United States, and countries just hours before the deadline for a nuclear deal. Earlier, Iran pushed back from a promise to sending a big portion of that stockpile of uranium to Russia, a portion that will be included in their future weapons plan. Many Western countries, including the United States, are saying that the uranium needed not to be shipped overseas, but can be destroyed in other forms. Tell me, as we sit here right now, what would you like the United States to do to make certain that we get really our bang of the buck?
I think we need to continue to, in essence, do what we've been doing. And, you know, there have been a form of sanctions, you know, with Iran really since the 1970s. I was there the last time that sanctions were beefed up, which was in the early 1990s. I think it was around 1996 or thereabouts. But it was the last time I was there in Congress and we were voting on it. And it basically beefed up some of the sanctions that were in place.
Right.
And now the question is, where do we go from here? And we have a really divided course in Washington. The president said, basically, we need to, in essence, weaken our hold in our ability to have impact in what with what Iran does or does not do with regard to nuclear program. I subscribe more to what Ronald Reagan said, which was trust but verify. And until we can verify, I don't know that we need to trust. I think that if you look at how volatile that part of the world is, it's a real hotspot. Some of these conflicts go back literally throughout the ages. And the idea of inducing nuclear weapons into what is already a hostile part of the world, I think doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Based on, okay, if Iran gets one, then what's Saudi Arabia going to want to do?
Right.
If Iran gets one, what is Israel's impact? Netanyahu came and testified before the Congress a couple weeks ago, and basically said if they move to the point wherein they can create a nuclear bomb, whether you're coming with us or not, we're going.
Right.
And so I think at a variety of different levels, we look at more escalation of conflict with a nuclear-armed Iran rather than less. And therefore, until they prove themselves to be a good actor in that part of the world, not a sponsor of terrorism,
Right.
not supporting terrorism movement. For instance, if you look at what's going on in Yemen right now,
Right.
Iran is, I mean, by all accounts, directly involved.
Yes, they are.
And until you see a cease and desist, I don't know that we need to be upping our game with regard to trusting them. They haven't done the things that are verifiable, whether it's in Yemen or a variety of other spots around the world, to, I think, earn that trust. So I'm of the school of wait and see. I don't agree with the president's decision to try and, in essence, scale back our ability to retard their development of nuclear weapons. And that's where I'll stay. I mean, I signed on, I think it was like 360 members or so signed on to a letter to the president saying, put the brakes on this. We don't think it's a good idea for you to move ahead right now. Whether or not he takes that advice or not, we'll see.
And you touched on Yemen. Let's talk more about that. If you were advising Secretary of State John Kerry right now, what would you tell him to do in that situation?
I wouldn't. I mean, I'm on the Budget Committee and I'm on Transportation Committee. I'm not on International Relations. And so I don't have a direct grasp around what the right response is from America, other than say this.
Okay.
I think in some cases we've been our worst enemy in that part of the world. And, you know, if you try and be policeman for the world, and if you stay in my neighborhood long enough, I'm going to end up resenting you being there. And we've been in that part of the world for more than 10 years. With due respect to President Bush or others who said we need to jump in with both feet, I don't know that the Middle East is a more settled place than it was 10 years ago, and I think that that's the ultimate litmus test. So what I would say is, notwithstanding, the bigger conflict of what's happening in Yemen, and therefore the micro as to what you should or shouldn't do in that one country, I think that there's a bigger regional question about, outside of laying out some goal lines and saying, we don't think it's a good idea to have nuclear weapons. We think we should or shouldn't be trading in a couple of spots. I think we need to lighten our footprint in that part of the world. We cannot afford, from a financial standpoint, to continue to try and play policeman for the world. And, an interesting article this week, Duncan Hunter's on the Armed Services Committee, a guy from San Diego, and his point was, in conflict, go in, make a difference, and get the heck out of Dodge, and that's the way we used to do it. World War II, we went in, we fought it hard, and then we went home. And certainly we had peace plans, like the Marshall Plan and other things. But in terms of active military engagement, we lessened our footprint. We got out. And I think we'd be wise to take some of those lessons from the playbook and maybe reapply them in that part of the world.
From Iran and Yemen to Washington, let's talk about those Clinton emails that are really controversial right now. A Clinton lawyer basically told Trey Gowdy that, hey, the server was wiped clean and that therefore all the emails are gone. When you hear that, what do you tell yourself?
He who has nothing to hide doesn't hide.
That's right.
And so I think that a lot of people rightfully are concerned in that if it doesn't break the actual law, it breaks the spirit of the law. And that each one of us as public figures has a requirement to be transparent in our activity, and to say, here's what I'm doing, here's why I'm doing it, and then people could say, well, we disagree or we agree. But if you don't do that, if there's no ability for a taxpayer to look behind and say, I agree or I disagree, really we're hurting the process. So I think it's a process question about, it's not transparency for transparency's sake that you want in government activity. It's transparency because the founding fathers believed in Lord Acton's notion of power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that any of us in office can do right in our own eyes, but the book of Proverbs says, well, it's not right in your own eyes that matters, it's right in everybody's eyes, not only God's eyes, but your fellow man or woman. And so I just think that, it's a process question that I think is wrong. There may be a legality question that I guess Trey Gowdy and others will examine. And there's a taxpayer component. If you're involved in spending my money, I want to see how it's spent.
And let's stay on Capitol Hill because obviously you just talked about the House budget, and that's been a talk around the Hill for a couple of days as well. And you actually said this on Facebook, which is very telling. Quote, well, we are halfway there on the budget this year. The House is done, and if the Senate soon does the same, our federal budget will get debated and overview in a way that has not been the case since Harry Reid took over Senate operations years ago. Two things. What do you hope the Senate will pass in that budget? And two, what do you think went wrong under the direction of Harry Reid?
I think that what would happen would be we would get a level of debate and scrubbing and taxpayer accountability that you can't get in a divided budget. So what happened before was House would pass a budget, Senate would not, and so if you don't have a budget, then you sort of throw everything but the kitchen sink into the kitchen sink and you call it a continuing resolution or an omnibus. A continuing resolution is saying, we'll take whatever we spent last year, we're going to spend it again this year. Now, for folks in business world, can you imagine anything worse? I mean, you're like, you got to be kidding me. You'd go out of business in a matter of months or a matter of years if your budget process is, whatever we spent last year, we're going to spend it again this year. No, good businesses, good organizations, good community endeavors reshuffle the cards. They say, this program isn't working out so well over here, but let's redeploy it into this program over here that's working out well. That annual reshuffling of the cards is vital to good government. It's awfully important to actually look at each of the different line items. These big giant bills are non-debatable, non-amendable. So a CR or omnibus bill it's thumbs up or thumbs down. The question, okay, are we going to fund government or not? I guess we have a requirement to fund it, so we'll fund it. But there's no real scrubbing. What happens when you set a budget is you set a top line, and then from that, each of the 12 different categories that make up what they call domestic discretionary have their number that fits within that top line. And then each of the different committees, appropriation and authorization committee, go out and they debate each one of those items. And each member, and I remember doing this back when I was a freshman in Congress, offering, more than 100 amendments to an ag bill with Tom Coburn, which was overdoing it. But in fairness to the system, you could do that back then. You could say, based on what I hear from folks back home, I think this is where they're coming from, and this is what they believe. And you can't do that presently. And so that annual scrubbing is vital to ultimately ending up with better bills, bills that are looked at in terms of how the money's spent, bills that are scrubbed in terms of their efficiency, and bills that aren't amalgamated. When you have $1 trillion bill, a lot gets lost in a pile of, programs that big. So at many different levels of budget is really, really important. As to what Harry Reid did or why he did it, I think is partisan politics, which is what makes the world go round. I'm not saying that pejorative toward him. It exists on the Republican side as well. But he, he didn't want to have a smooth running process. I mean, you had a tug of war on who was going to take the Senate, who was going to take the House, and the more you could disrupt the normal flow of things and keep things from actually making the way to the president's desk, probably, at least in his perception, it would accrue to his political advantage. So I think it was done for political reasons, and we're past that now. Hopefully Republicans can come together, House done, and Senate soon on a budget that fits together, and it has that top line number. What was happening before was the House was at one number, Senate was at a different number, a much higher number. They couldn't get to agreement, and in the absence of agreement, it all got swept into the giant CR or omnibus bill I was just referring to.
Wow. And speaking of Harry Reid, he's retiring now. What does that mean for you and your Republican Party?
It means somebody else will take his place. I think Republicans have done themselves a disservice by all the hoopla that went into, if we could only take the Senate, then it would be different. The fact is, they oversold. The rules as designed by the Founding Fathers give tremendous leverage and authority to the team in power, if you want to call it that, to the majority power on the House side. But they give that same leverage to the minority over on the Senate side. I mean, the beauty of the Founding Fathers system was we're going to cut and dice and slice power so many different ways that will make it very difficult for a authoritarian to become king. They feared a king. And so there's a wisdom to that. It makes our system less efficient, but it is by design. And so one of the checks on power is give power and authority to the majority in the House, but give power to the minority in the Senate. So the rules actually favor the minority. So when you say, it'll all be better if we just take the Senate, you're ignoring the real configuration of the way the Founding Fathers set up the Senate and the tools, in essence, they gave to the minority side. And that works to either party's advantage, depending on who's in or out of power.
Well, describe to me the following one word quickly. Offshore drilling.
Not a good idea. This is not one word, so you want one word.
It's good for you.
Yeah. What I'd say is an issue of concern. I was in Flowertown Festival yesterday, and I probably had 5 people bring that up with me, and that says a lot. If 5 random people are bringing up the same subject, so I'd say point of concern. People love the coast. They love this part of the world. They come here for a reason, in part because it looks and feels different than Beaumont, Texas, and other more industrial coastlines in America.
South Carolina State University.
Controversy. Unfortunately, that controversy has existed for a long time. And back when I was governor,
Right.
there was controversy then.
Right.
There's still controversy. And so it may be a case of too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah.
I think that it was maybe Patton who said, you know, if you want a lieutenant to take a hill, tell him to take the hill, let him figure out which route's best.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of direction from many different constituencies that play into South Carolina State, such that it, I think, becomes a fairly complex organism that has proven to be very tough and difficult to govern.
Yeah. Bo Berdahl, that is.
Who?
Bo Berdahl.
The deserter?
Right, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know his first name was Bo. Tragedy with more tragedy still to come. You know, I think at many different levels. He had tragedy in whatever happened on the given day when a guy deserts, for what that means for him as a person, for what that means for those around him and those that are put in danger. He had further tragedy multiplied when he's traded off with some folks that aren't so good, and to ultimately see the outside of jail. And now you probably got more tragedy coming based on charges that I think will be leveled against him. So tragedy, tragedy, and tragedy.
Mark Sanford is a vice presidential candidate.
Not happening.
Congressman Mark Sanford, thank you again for your time.
Anyway, pleasure. Good to see you.